Good evening and welcome to a conversation with JORAM van Klaveren, tackling far-right extremism. I'm your host, Adnan Sohail, and hopefully over the next hour, we'll be having a very close discussion with our distinguished guest and our main guest for tonight's and this evening's program. This program has been brought to you by British Institute of Peace. British Institute of Peace is a self-funded academic community initiative established to provide accredited training programs on peace education studies with the objective of fostering deeper community relations and cohesion. BIP will further provide grassroots programs including events through which young people and community groups can discuss the issues which affect them in an open, safe and neutral environment. We're very fortunate to have such a very distinguished guest with us this evening. Before we introduce and bring on our guest for this evening's program, we have a very short video which will give you a deep and further insight for you, the viewer at home, whether you're watching on social media, Facebook and YouTube, giving you a greater insight into who JORAM van Klaveren is. So let's see this video and give you an insight to the life of JORAM van Klaveren.
Daarnaast blijkt uit onderzoek dat antisemitisme en homofoob geweld velig tieren onder Marokkanen. De legitimatie voor deze ellende, de islam, verzoekt de regering haar angstige en politiek correcte houding ten aanzien van de islam te laten varen en de negatieve invloed van deze kwaadaardige ideologie die moet worden tegengegaan, verzoekt de regering de islam zoveel mogelijk uit Nederland te bannen en gaat over tot de orde van de dag.
That was me back then. This is me now. I'm no longer a member of the far right. Ironically, the thing that made me join the far right is the same thing that made me leave. It was Islam. And this is my story.
My name is JORAM van Klaveren and I'm a former member of the Dutch parliament who represented the Party for Freedom, the anti-Islamic nationalist party of Geert Wilders. For years, I gave everything I had to fight against Islam. I tried to make legislation to shut down all Islamic schools in the Netherlands. I attempted to close all mosques, ban the Quran, and ban Islam altogether from the Netherlands. As a Dutch politician, I opposed Islam in every way possible. Then, in 2017, I left Parliament and finally had the time to fulfill a long-held desire to write an anti-Islam book. I wanted a book that would provide conclusive theoretical groundings for all of the objections I held against Islam as a politician. My book would settle the dispute about Islam with a clear conclusion. Islam is a danger to Europe, to America, to the West, and actually to the whole wide world. Before writing my book, my view about Islam was influenced by the conservative Protestant environment of my upbringing, in which other religions, and certainly Islam, was definitely seen as wayward and wrong. I was also influenced by the cultural aversion towards Islam that many Europeans have, which was a result of their historic clashes with the Islamic world. And of course, the fears and worries I experienced during years of studying comparative religion at the university formed my opinions. Remarkably, my studies at the university actually began on September 11, 2001. Many horrors would sadly follow, inside and outside of Europe, from the murder of columnist Theo van Gogh to kidnappings, anti-Semitic terror and beheadings, to haphazard stabs, truck attacks and suicide attacks, to the proclamation of the Caliphate by ISIS. There were even Muslims from the Netherlands who traveled as jihadists to Syria. These events confirmed and deepened my negative feelings about Islam and motivated me to join Wilders' party. I believed that Islam should be fought wherever possible. But as I began writing my book, I came across information that was at odds with the ideas I had. I learned that many of my ideas about Islam, stated by Orientalists, far-right Westerners, and even Islamic extremists, had little or no basis in historical Islam. My research often presented me with context and interpretations that were very different from those I had propagated for years in politics. A more nuanced image of Islam slowly developed in my mind. Seeking more information, I wrote to various academic authorities on Islam, including Professor Abdul Hakim Murad of Cambridge University. He pointed out various scholars, books, and facts, and advised me to read again and more deeply this time. One by one, my objections to Islam vanished. Islam was no longer a religion that promoted violence, hatred, and anti-Semitism, or a religion that categorized women and non-believers as inferior humans and stridently opposed democracy. Slowly, my perspective of Islam was changing. I also received surprisingly satisfying Islamic answers to my existing Christian questions about specific dogmas, such as the Trinity, the sacrifice of Christ, and original sin. All that I was learning about Islam influenced my work on the book in such a way that it began to take on the character of a personal search for God. During this search, the person of Prophet Muhammad raised the most questions with me. Who was this man? A deceiver, an antichrist, or was he truly, as Muslims believe, the last prophet of God? I started to read again about his life, but now without the previous biases I had. And I saw a more than special man, a man with almost supernatural patience, care, love, guidance, and above all, dedication to his God and to his mission for justice. The arguments against his person and against his prophethood disappeared as I made a comparison with Old Testament prophets. In fact, I now understood what the 19th century historian Thomas Carlyle meant when he wrote, "The lies which well-meaning zeal has heaped around this man Muhammad are disgraceful to ourselves only."
Like all radical ideologies, the far right is toxic too. It presents a reality that strips away all nuance. It answers real problems with lies, and it fights against a religion, Islam, that is not the enemy. The real enemies are a deficit of empathy and ignorance, like the great philosopher Socrates already said. So let us read, study and learn. Extremism is not the answer. My name is JORAM van Klaveren for the Emir Stein Center.
This video was produced in collaboration with Alliance of Virtue.
That was just a short video about the life of Joram, who we are very happy to say who is joining us all the way from Holland. Assalamu alaikum, Joram. hopefully Joram will be joining us. Assalamu alaikum, Joram. How are we doing this evening?
Alaikum salam. I don't know if you hear me.
I can hear you quite loud and clear.
Okay. Okay, nah, that's very nice. It's very important for an interview. I'm very delighted to be on your show, so it's a great honor for me.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. And as our viewers have just seen that short 5 minutes video of your transformation from what you were in terms of involved in politics. Obviously, Geert Wilders is a very popular name in the political arena. You were associated with the Freedom Party in the Netherlands. You transformed from Christianity, then it went into far right, and then you dedicated your life to Islam. You've had a very a unique journey, a journey in 3 parts. I just wanted to start and start this program about asking about your transformation from a religion into far right and into another religion. How was that journey like for you? Joram, can you hear me, Joram? I think we... I think hopefully we'll just try to get the connection relinked. But if Joram, if you can hear me, we'll try to get the link back again to Holland. We had this we had no issue beforehand, and we had a very good link, and we had a really good conversation before going on air with Joram. Joram, as you're well aware, accepted Islam in 2018. He was part of the Freedom Party in Netherlands, whose leader was Geert Wilders. Many of Joram's statements were echoed around the world, where he was quite vocal in banning Islam and calling the Quran a poisonous book. These sentiments then echoed not just in Parliament but across the Netherlands, and then it sort of expanded around the world. And then whilst he was writing a book about anti-Islam, he says that he found the religion of Islam. So today is an opportunity for us to basically ask him these questions and dwell further into the life of Joram, from a transformation from one aspect of his life to accepting Islam. Let's see if we can try to get Joram back on. Joram, assalamu alaikum. We're trying our best to. There is again, unfortunately, some sort of technical issues that have arose again. We will try going back to Holland, where we'll be able to listen to and watch the program in detail and hear what Joram has to say. Our technical team is working on this just to get Joram relinked. In the meanwhile, if you have any questions for our guest tonight, you can submit your questions on Facebook and YouTube. The links are on your screen, and hopefully Joram is more than eager to hear your questions from the audience in terms of how he accepted Islam and how he submitted and dedicated his life to tackling far-right extremism. We are very fortunate that Joram is not just now a voice for Islam, but also he's doing a lot of work as a political lobbyist in Netherlands, trying to get the right message within the political arena in Netherlands. So, my dear brothers and sisters, you're watching this very important program. And as you're well aware, many weeks ago, the race riots erupted in America, especially with the killing of George Floyd. British Institute of Peace have now organized a number of seminars and events highlighting the issue of far-right extremism, of racism, and finding ways of tackling these issues within our societies and within our own communities. So it's great to have individuals like Joram who speaks out against finding solutions to eradicating these elements within our societies. And again, he used words like empathy of a peaceful society to ensure that we can become more dedicated in our approach to realistically tackling extremism. And I think we have Joram there. Joram, can you hear me?
Yeah, loud and clear. Sorry, there was some kind of technical problem, I think, as we got disconnected.
Yeah, I was just saying that just before going live on air, we had the opportunity to speak, and it was all clear and everything.
Yeah.
So, Joram, the time is yours, and I think there's a lot of questions. You have a very interesting career and an interesting life, and I just want to repeat the question again to yourself, and I think it's a really good start in terms of understanding who Joram is, understanding your life, and especially looking at the core subject that we are highlighting today, which is far-right extremism and the far-right, the far wider issue of race, especially with the killing of George Floyd in America. And I just wanted to, especially for the audience, understand your transformation from reading about your life. You were a Christian, and then you had certain far-right elements, and then afterwards you dedicated yourself to the religion of Islam. How did that transformation happen, and how have you phased out, and how has that phasing out in your life sort of changed you as an individual?
That's a big question. Well, thank you for the question. To start with the beginning, of course, I was raised in a quite conservative Protestant environment. So the views you have when it comes to other religions aren't that positive in general. So it wasn't about Islam in specific. It was more like all other religions, even other denominations in the Christian church, were wrong. So that's the beginning, and that's one aspect of the total package that made me went far right for me, because all stories are different, of course. Also for people who join the far right, even or the far left. So it's a personal story, and one important aspect of this story is that I was what I told brought up in a Protestant conservative environment where other religions were seen as wrong. Another aspect of it is, of course, the fact that we saw in over many years a lot of terrorism, a lot of attacks from jihadi groups in Europe or Africa or Asia or all over the world. And because I was still a youngster, and I did study comparative religion at the Free University in Amsterdam, and my first day was September 11, 2001. So there was kind of a coincidence that that day, of course, of the attack on the World Trade Center was my first day when I start trying to study Islam, but also Christianity, Judaism, etc. But because of all the news and all the things that were happening all around the world, the focus was primarily on Islam. And in the Netherlands, there was a very famous cineast. There was a guy, Theo van Gogh, and he was murdered in the streets by a jihadi. His throat was slit and he was shot down. And it was near my old house. So it was very nearby in a literal sense as well. So the combination of those things made me very sensitive for people who said, well, Islam is a danger for the Netherlands and for all freedom-loving people in the world. And when I was young, so I was active for the Liberal Party in the Netherlands. But they got into a fight, an internal fight, because one of the persons who was also a member of the Liberal Party, that was Geert Wilders back then, I'm talking about 2004, he said, well, you're too soft when it comes to Islam. We have to be tougher, and we have to make sure that we are protected against those criminals, because that's how they called them. And he said, well, I need some space in a political sense. And they said, well, you cannot have the space you want to develop your own views, because you're a member of the Liberal Party, and we have liberal views, and it doesn't combine with the things you say and you want. So he started his own political party, and there was the year that Theo van Gogh was murdered. And 2-3 years after, of course, 9/11, and my own upbringing and the combination of all those factors made me that I said to myself, well, what is the most anti-Islam party here in the Netherlands? That's the party I'm going to join, because I was not so much afraid, but I was very worried about the future. And I thought by myself, well, we have to fight Islam in every way possible. So I joined the Freedom Party then, and my own family wasn't that happy about it, because what I told you, most of the people in my family, especially my grandfather and the generation before, the generation of my parents, were very strict when it comes to religion, and in the Christian sense, because most of the people in the Netherlands are Christian.
I just want to intervene here and just ask you, and you're more than welcome to come. I think it just sounds quite poignant to ask you here as well. Do you think your struggles of being a practicing Christian in a secular society was similar to being a practicing Muslim? Especially,
sorry?
I'm asking, your struggles of being a practicing Christian. You mentioned that you were brought up in a very strict Christian denomination. So I'm asking, were your struggles of being a practicing Christian in a secular society similar to being a practicing Muslim?
Yeah, somewhat, yeah. In a sense, because it's different, because Christianity is in the view of most of the people, of course, even secular people who hate religion sometimes, but even those people say, well, Christianity is part of the culture. So when it comes, for example, to Christmas or Easter or stuff like that, and holidays, they say, well, we don't like the religious aspect of it, but we can celebrate because it's culture. It's been here for over 1,000 years, so it's part of who we are, our heritage. Because in the PVV, the Freedom Party, there also was a group of people who said, well, we don't like the fact that there are Christians and other religious people, but we tolerate it, so to say, because it's culture, and we are a nationalist party, of course, and we cherish our cultural heritage, because that there was something that was like a core value for them. But when it comes to talking about God, really only about God and not in a cultural sense, there was a problem, of course. And I think that's a problem in general for religious people in the West nowadays, because sometimes it's like it's secularism on steroids nowadays. Because when you talk about God, people say, no, don't mention it. It's like a forbidden topic almost. But to answer your question, in a sense it was the same. But the main difference, of course, is especially when you look at women, you cannot see someone being a Christian when you only look at them, because a Christian girls, for example, don't wear hijab. And a Christian man most of the time don't wear a beard. Sometimes they do, of course, but it can be something of fashion as well, for example. And when it comes to Muslims, also, of course, the color of the skin. Most of the Muslims in the Netherlands aren't white, So that's something different for them when it comes to being able to be part of society in a religious sense without being asked about it. So in a sense it's the same, but when it comes to the reaction of other people, I think it's different.
So would you argue that there's a need to have?
And sorry for the.
No, it's okay. Can you hear me, Joram?
Yeah, I can hear you. Sometimes it's like it's disconnected a few seconds.
I apologize for that. We're in the era of modern technology, and we're going to have this unfortunate disconnection. I just wanted to move on from this and in a way connect it as well. Would you sort of kind of argue that there is a need to have more open discussion about extremism, both within Islam and also in the far right secular movements in the West?
Yeah, I think it's very important to talk about extremism in general. But of course, yeah, my background makes me. I'm not in a position always to talk about extremism on the other side, because that's not the area I'm familiar with. But I know there are a lot of extremist guys and girls on the far right, and of course there are on the very left side, and there are in Islam, of course, extremists as well, just like there are extremists in, for example, Buddhist societies or Christian societies or even Jewish society. It's a general problem, extremism. Only nowadays the focus is on Islam, unfortunately.
The reason why I ask you this is because obviously you brought up in the West. You live in a very you came from a very indigenous family, and obviously you came from you're part of a political movement, and especially reading some of the statements that you had when you were part of the Freedom Party. The Quran is a very poisonous book, or you should ban Islam. I'm just trying to understand, when you were in that position of your life, and from your experience, why do you think there was at that time a surge in the Western world towards far right movements? And adding to this, do you think, and what do you think this means for minorities, especially Muslim minorities, who are generally painted by these far right thinkers as extremist or anti-Western?
Yeah, well, I think that the biggest problem in the West, and there are not too many people who agree with me, because I have this discussion had on television and radio as well, of course, in the Netherlands. But I think it's secularism, because the fact that the West lost its own core story, as you can say, it's the big story was Christianity, of course. Everything had to do with Christianity, and they lost Christianity. And there's nothing that replaced Christianity. And there's a famous religion scientist, is called Marcia Eliade. He's from Romania. And he said, it's a famous statement of his, he says that people are religious, whether they are religious or not. They're always religious. So it's a hole in your heart, and you try to fill it. And some people without religion, they start filling it, for example, with nationalism, or they start filling it with racism, or they start filling it with drugs, or with partying, or whatever fills the emptiness that will come in. But because Christianity, of course, was the religion of the West for so many years, so many centuries, it influenced everything: journalism, politics, ethics, everything. But it disappeared slowly, and from I think about the 70s in the Netherlands, I think, and I think that's something in the whole West. You see people turning against the religion, and they're turning against authorities in a religious sense. So when there arrives a group of people who are still very into their religion, and not like in a cultural sense, but really like practicing Muslims, believing Muslims, that's a big problem, because people, it's like they see a mirror. We had that's who we are, but they recognize some things, but at the same time it's so far away because they don't want to be connected to that side anymore. And I had a conversation with my grandfather. He was what I told you, was a very Christian man, and he told me, he said, well, if Muslims came to Europe in the 20s, we wouldn't have those problems, because most of the things that secular people in the West are having problems with when it comes to Muslims or Islam, those are the same problems that a lot of Christian people would have had if they were arriving here today as practicing Christians in such a secular society. So I think that's a main problem.
Yeah, obviously you've been involved in Dutch politics for many years, and you're a member of parliament. I was just reading in your book, and you quote this, the Pew Research Center in 2018 says that Netherlands is the most non-believing country. The relationship between the state and their role in downplaying elements of radicalism or extremism. How can you? So, what kind of advice? And I know you are heavily involved in this. What kind of advice do you give to state actors and to government officials when it comes to sort of eradicating radicalism or de-eradicating this mindset that they have of Islam?
Yeah, that's a very tough question, of course. But in my personal life, it was education, it was knowledge. So it's very important that people who talk about, for example, Islam in a policy sense, that they know what they are talking about, because a lot of people don't know what they are talking about. And it's not something that I say, well, that's a bad thing. I think it's a dangerous thing, because it's not on purpose. It's just people want to do good, but it's often the opposite. And that's a big problem, because if you let people who don't have any knowledge about Islam or about cultural diversion, for example, make policy, that can be very problematic, because they don't see certain problems, and they see problems that aren't problems at all, and I think that's a big problem.
Just for our viewers, if anybody does want to ask questions to Joram, you're more than welcome. We will have your questions via Facebook and YouTube on the screen for Joram to see that. Joram beforehand was very encouraging in getting questions from our viewers. It's being broadcast all around the world through social media via Facebook and YouTube. It will also be played on afterwards as well. So we will forward your questions and your queries, or just a general thought in terms of this discussion. Joram, I'm sure you were very aware of the situation in America and the killing of George Floyd, and I don't think there is anybody who isn't watching this was glued onto the TV screens, whether it was for 5 or 6 minutes and watching that video. The discussion has been, I think, a lot more. We had the UK anti-extremism chief Sarah Khan talk about this in great detail, and she talked about how extremists and the far right have used the Black Lives Matters as an opportunity to infiltrate into social media and to dissect or dilute the original message of racism. So my question is do you think movements like Black Lives Matters is effective in educating the people about race, or do you think it provides leverage to far right groups? What do you think, Joram?
Yeah, of course, it's not the goal of a movement like Black Lives Matters, but it is true what you said. A lot of far right organizations are very happy with a movement like Black Lives Matter, especially with the riots and the stuff that happens, tearing down statues, because it confirms their story. They say, well, look at them, they're barbarians, they are trashing down our culture, they are making the things miserable in this country, and we don't do anything. Look at them. And that's a narrative that's very powerful, because of course there are problems in minority groups as well, cultural problems, religious problems, just like there are in Dutch cultural society, a white cultural society. So that's a big problem. But of course, yeah, Black Lives Matter is a movement that makes it easy for far-right movements to share their story and to be confirmed in their story, and not because of the message of Black Lives Matter in the core, but when you look at what happens, for example, in Seattle and stuff like that, it's like propaganda almost for the far right.
There is a sort of kind of a discussion on systematic racism in America that has been going on for a long time, and especially after the death of George Floyd. Do you think these underlying issues of systematic racism exist in many countries throughout Europe, and that they tend to come to the forefront whenever a hate crime occurs that is given widespread media? If there is institutional racism, what can we do to address it?
Yeah, institutional racism. Yeah, of course, I think it exists, but I don't think it's only in Europe. I think it's worldwide. It's a worldwide problem. And when you look at the protest, it's something that's how do you say it? It's something that it's very strange, so to say, that when you look at the United States.
What do you mean strange? In what sense strange?
Strange that when I look at, for example, China or Africa or Southeast Asia or South America or Mexico, for example, those are, of course, places where racism also exists. Just like in the Middle East, I've been to many countries, especially the last 2 years, and sometimes institutional racism is very extreme in some parts of the world, and of course it exists in the West as well, especially in America. It's a kind of different situation, of course, than in the Netherlands, because the way the United States was founded, of course, is very different than the Netherlands or, for example, England. But yeah, it exists, and I think that has to do with the fact that most of the people, the native people in Europe, are white. So all institutions are white, and it's not something they started long ago because they wanted to be racist, but just because it was the norm. There were no other people. But of course, society changed. So you have to make sure that the access and the way people are trying to be part of institutions, it has to be open. And that's a problem sometimes in the Netherlands as well. But I think it's what I said. I think it's a worldwide problem. But of course, we live in the West, so we focus on the West. But it is a problem. But yeah, and how can you solve it? It's yeah, you have to change the law sometimes, of course. But I think it's the most important thing. It's a cultural thing. It's a mindset. And that's something that it can be changed in 1 or 2 years. It's something that has to grow, and I think, and I'm optimistic about it. But I think that it will change and maybe in about 40 years, and it's a long time, and people don't like to hear that it's taken so many years. But I think it will solve itself in the end.
We've got a question here from a Miss Annem from London, and she says, at the beginning of your book, you mentioned that your perception of Islam was predominantly negative because of what you would hear about the barbaric terrorist violence, death threats, honor killings, and forced marriages. Would you say that a large portion of those who haven't done research on Islam in the Netherlands would have a similar view on Islam?
People who, sorry, the last thing I didn't.
She said that a large portion, a large majority of those who haven't done research on Islam
Who haven't?
who haven't done research on Islam in the Netherlands would have a similar view on Islam or of Islam.
Yeah. I know they have, because there are many research projects and pollings and stuff like that. And in general, you can say that about 2/3 of the Netherlands, 76% of the people say Islam is alien to the West, and the West would be better off without Islam. So everything that the combination of the things you just got, that culminates in such a statement, of course.
Now, I know this is kind of very controversial discussion, but on page 20 of your book, you write, this is the book Apostate, which is translated into English. You wrote that governments have a very passive attitude to battling this extremism, which is, and I say this, foreign funded. I don't want to mention the names of the countries. Due to this attitude, the views of the loud minority of extremists have become more dominant in the Islamic community. So would you say that Western governments are responsible for allowing extremist Islamic ideologies to spread within their countries? And how can this issue be resolved, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think that's a big part of the problem, of course, and that's not something that a lot of people in the West like to hear, but a lot of problems in Islam and the Islamic world started with the Western countries interfering in those countries. For example, when you look at Iran or Iraq or Syria or Libya or Somalia, there are a lot of Western powers, especially the United States, and also, and that's not something I like to say, but also the United Kingdom, of course, and France, and even the Netherlands. They were all part of coalitions who started wars there and started intervening in problems that were, in essence, local problems. Afghanistan, for example, why the United States attacked Afghanistan, it doesn't make any sense. So, and of course, that creates a certain environment, and it creates also a certain movement, a protest movement, so to say, because a lot of those countries are still very religious. Of course, it will be shifted and formed inside a religious context. So I think that the West is partly responsible, of course, for extremism inside Islam, and I think that's a big problem. And the Western countries, as long as they don't solve the way they act when it comes to foreign policy, that won't change. And of course, you have a big Muslim minority in your countries. They look at the news as well. They see what happened. They don't only look at CNN, but also Al Jazeera, TRT, or whatever. So you have, it's almost impossible not to get very sad or angry or. Yeah, and so that's what I meant with page 20 or 23. I don't know it by heart.
Again, we have a lot of questions coming in. A lot of people are posing questions, Joram. We have another question from a Majid from Birmingham, and he asked this question. So in your personal quest to find God, did you find that there were many different sources about Islam available that informed you of concepts that seemed world apart? And he goes further and says, did you come across many extremist Islamic works back then? How did you know which scholars or books to turn to in order to learn about the true heart of Islam, the true Islam?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because what you see is that the far right, especially my old party, the Freedom Party in the Netherlands, and that is the same as you look at, for example, British National Party, or when you look at parties in Germany or Austria or Italy or France. They all, when it comes to Islam, they all share the same views, and those views they get those views from certain books and certain writers, and most of the time, though, those the sources are Orientalist sources or very extreme sources. For example, I once was reading a book for my old party that was written by someone who's a very popular guy in Boko Haram, and he was explaining Islam, and there was one guy said, well, maybe that's not Islam like it is Islam in a historical sense. But a lot of people in the party said, well, no, that's Islam. He's a Qadi, he's a Mufti, so he's someone who knows about Sharia, he's someone who knows, but of course it's a fringe, it's not the real deal. And when I was writing my book in 2017, I started with a lot of books, and of course there are some books here. One of the books here which I used when I was starting writing my book was called Endgame, and it was written by a professor, Islamic professor in the Netherlands. He died, and he was also a member of the European Parliament for the Freedom Party. And he was talking about, well, there will be an end game. There will be like a war in the end between the Islamic world and the Western world. But of course, when I was writing, I started with books like that. But I was looking for sources when they mentioned, okay, we get this information from source X. So I started looking for source X, and there was no source X. There was a book written by a guy who mentioned, who people said he was a Muslim in 18 something, but that's it. And there was no source of the source. So it was I think 10 stories and 10 topics that were very strong when it comes to criticizing Islam, for example, the position of women, when it comes to anti-Semitism, terrorism, stuff like that. And in right-wing groups, they always point to the same sources. And I was researching those sources, and so I discovered that there were no sources of the sources, and that troubled me because I was writing a book and I wanted to be. Besides the fact that I hated Islam back then, I wanted to be. It has to be a book that was correct. So it didn't care about whether it was anti. It has to be anti with a source. And so I started writing to several authorities on Islam, and one of those people was Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad from Cambridge University. And I wrote him an email, and I put a little Wikipedia link to it, and because it's in English as well. So I thought, well, he knows who I am then. So maybe if he doesn't want to answer me, he won't. And it took I think 5-6 weeks, and I thought, well, he will never answer. So I started writing other authorities. But then on a Saturday night, I got a 17-page answer of him. Well, okay, nice that you write, and he started explaining all of the things I was asking about. He said, well, look at this book, look at this source. No, that's not like this. So I got a college from him on the internet through email, and I wrote him back again with other questions. He started answering them again. And in the end, I had so many information that was at odds with the things I thought to be true about Islam that I had a problem. So he said to me, well, what you have to do is start rereading. And he gave me it's like a symbolic statement. He said, well, Islam is like a house. And he said, what you have to do is get out of the house, because you are in a barn next to the house. In a little shabby barn with all the extremist guys, and you have to get out of the barn, walk into the garden, look at the house, pick one room, walk through the room, and because you are walking through the house of Islam, you will see there are different rooms, and of course there are different religious strings, so to say, but the extremist string, the string of the barn where you were in, that's not part of Islam. That has never been part of Islam. Of course, there has always been extremism in all cultures and all times, but that's not Islam. So Abdul Hakim Murad was a very important person for me when it comes to discovering through Islam. And he said to me, well, what's very important is that you try to look at the 4 madhabs, of course. That's the core. And he said that's the historical core for over 1,500 years almost, 1,400 something. So that's a very important person for me when it comes to learning about the fundamentals of Islam and how to see what is correct, what is not correct, what is part of Islam, what's not part of Islam.
I have a follow-on question, but before we go there, we have a question on Facebook from a Ilahi Sefraz, and I'm sure you're able to see this on your screen. He poses this question: how is the onset of Islamic political parties in Europe? Is there cooperation between them or exchange of experiences?
Well, of course, I've never been part of an Islamic political party, but in the Netherlands there is one Islamic political party, but it's only in the city council, so it's very small. And there's another party that's in parliament, but it's a secular party, and it's more like a minority party, so it's not a real Islamic party. So in the Netherlands there are no real Islamic parties, only 1 or maybe 2, but they're in city councils, not in national parliament.
Okay.
No, I don't have a Facebook page.
No. So we have another question from YouTube. I'm just going to ask our technical guy. That was a really interesting question. So Muhammad Abbasi, he asks, he says, my question is where Joram wants to be in, say, 5 years time, not just as a journey or finding out more about Islam, but life, job, etc.
Well, I'm married to my wife, and I'm still happily married. I have 3 beautiful little daughters, so I'm happy with that. So I hope in 5 years that, first of all, they will still be healthy and happy. And besides that, I'm working on a lobby organization in the Netherlands with some other guys here. And in the Netherlands, there is no Islamic lobby organization. In the United States, for example, you have CARE. And I don't know if there is something like that in the UK, but in the Netherlands there's nothing, and all other groups have their own lobby organization when it comes to work in parliament. But Muslims don't have one. So some people ask me, well, why don't you start something like that? You have access to certain people, you have access to parliament, you know how it works, and and it's something personal. I've been in anti-Islamic politics for over 12 years altogether. So it's something, and nobody asked me to do that, but it's something for myself. I said to myself, well, I did that for 12 years, so the least I can do is work 12 years on the other side. So that's what I'm trying to do for the coming 12 years, is to erase the things I said, done, and hopefully the influence I had on certain people and ideas.
You know, you said, and quote, no sources of sources, and I'm assuming when you were trying to learn more about the true meaning of Islam or the true faith, where does Geert Wilders' sources come from when he's talking in front of a very wide audience, or when he's talking in front of a vote bank of far-right people who are sat in front of him?
When it comes to Islam or in general?
General.
Well, of course, like all famous politicians, there are speech writers. And he has a good speechwriter in a political sense. I don't agree, of course, with the message, but it's very powerful often. And what they do is just look at the current situation and when there is a big problem, for example, racism, and if there is a movement like Black Lives Matter, and if there are people who are started rioting, they say, well, look at them, they're all like that, and they collect certain extreme examples of things went wrong. And it's not only on this topic, but it's on other topics when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to education, police, safety, stuff like that. And what they do, they take the most extreme examples and that's what they bring to the audience. They say, well, did it happen or not? And people, yeah, it happened. So that's the truth. Yeah, of course, there's a context. Of course, it's just one example, but it's very hard to counter because there's and that's the problem with lies. If you lie in a good way, you always tell a little bit of the truth, and that's what they do all the time.
Has Geet ever tried a doner kebab from some nice Dutch restaurants, Turkish restaurants?
Sorry?
I said, has Geet Wilders ever tried some Turkish doner kebabs?
Probably, yeah. Well, he's of course it's not that he never ate something from for example, a Turkish restaurant, or he has been to the Middle East when he was very young. As a teenager, he has been to Jordan, Syria, and he always told us we're very nice people. It's just a pity for them they're Muslim.
I asked this question because he made a comment when you accepted Islam, which I found really strange, and I know you know what I was going to say. He compared your entering into Islam like a vegetarian going into a slaughterhouse.
That's typical Geert Wilders. Yeah, I can laugh about it because it's so silly. But it's his style. It's so extreme that you can only laugh about it. And it's the only thing I ever said about it. And it was another show. Someone asked, "What happened to your colleague, your friend, JORAM van Klaveren? How is it possible?" And there was a very right-wing television guy who asked him that, and he said, "Well, I don't know, and I don't want to talk about it anymore. I just know that some people go from darkness to light, and some people from light to darkness." And I was, in his view, of course, the last part. But he couldn't talk about it anymore.
So just a final question before you go, from a Shahid Iqbal, who asked, as someone who's coming to the Muslim community, what do you think Muslims can do in order to become a stronger, more welcoming and accepting community? Did you find any struggle to fit into the Muslim community?
No, really, because I didn't, and it was very. It was a surprise for me, a real surprise, because when I was considering converting or reverting, or I was really worried about not only about the family, of course, but also about the reactions from my old friends, extreme right, but also about the reaction of Muslims, because I thought to myself, well, you have been bashing and trashing those people and the culture and Islam and the religion and everything for so many years. I can imagine that they're very mad at me and angry because all of a sudden I said, well, I was wrong, sorry, I'm a Muslim now. So, because of course that's not how it went, but in the view of people who didn't follow the process, and so that was something I was very worried about. But I have to say, there was no one, really no practicing Muslim who criticized me. So that was very confirming to me that I made a good decision. And of course, later on, I learned that it's a religious duty almost to be welcoming to newcomers. So there was I have to say, there was no one. Yeah, of course, there were people who criticized me, also people with, for example, Turkish background or Afghan background, but those people were always secular or ex-Muslims. And the last group is very angry at me, very angry. Yeah, almost the same as far right. They say, "Well, you're a traitor of the mind, and how can you be so backward?" And so that's a big problem. But when it comes to Muslims, and for me, and that's of course it's my own personal story. It was very welcoming, very warm, and very satisfying to become a member of the Ummah.
Joram, I have to get this last question, I promise, after this, because he's posed this question. So I'm going to ask my technical guy if I can get the last questions from Mr. Abbasi up. So before this question, there was another question that he had. So he says, Sun Tzu said, and The greatest victory is that which requires no battle. There is no instance of a nation benefiting from a prolonged warfare. So that's what Sun Tzu says. So he's asking, do you think Muslims should follow this strategy more, as it leaves the door open to brothers like yourself, like you, rather than getting emotional and everything that comes with it, basically?
Yeah, and definitely. Because of course I once was a big enemy, and I never thought, if someone told me 10 years ago, well, you will be a Muslim, I probably laughed at him and maybe slapped him in the face. But no, but yeah, things happen. So yeah, of course, I think and I think that's a religious duty as well. It's part of religion to be open and welcoming, because in the end, it's not only that we are working here in the dunya. You're working for the hereafter as well, and that's even your biggest enemy. That's for me. Even your biggest enemy, you don't wish for them hell, and so I think you have to do anything in a positive sense to try to persuade those persons, whether it's in a debate, or it's with arguments, or it's in your behavior, because that's very powerful as well. I've seen it, a lot of people converting to Islam because of the behavior of some Muslims, and so that's very powerful. So I always try to be positive, and if people are very negative, well, you can laugh about it, and that's it. What else? What can we do?
Joram, thank you so much. I hope the COVID-19 and the coronavirus, I'm sure you're keeping safe from it, your family's keeping safe from it. It must be very hectic. I'm sure you have a very busy schedule, but we are very grateful on behalf of British Institute of Peace, and most importantly, our audience and viewers who've tuned in. We're very sorry. Apologize once again for the technical mishaps that happened at the beginning of the program. We apologize, but Joram, if there's a final comment that you would like to make to our viewers and to our audience, especially on the topic of our discussion on far-right extremism, and how as a community, through platforms like social media, we can come together and tackle a very growing illness within our society.
Yeah, of course. I always try when I'm having discussions on, for example, Twitter or debates wherever. I always try to go back to the core, the source, and it's Islam. So yeah, people far right, far left, whatever far wing, they need God as well. So the only thing I would say is spread the message and show them Islam.
Thank you, Joram, for joining us on behalf of British Institute of Peace. Once again, thank you so much, and I hope you have a very good evening. Thank you so much.
You too. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was JORAM VAN KLAVERN, the former member of the Freedom Party in the Netherlands. JORAM accepted Islam in 2018. However, he went through a very difficult journey throughout his life, and was part of a far-right movement in banning Islam, or banning religion of Islam in Netherlands, and he was very vocal in Parliament. In the past hour, we've heard his story, we've heard his thought processes, his ideas in terms of what he feels are the core reasons, and at the same time how we can come together to tackle this, as I say, a growing illness within our societies. I do urge everybody to tune into the British Institute of Peace programs. We're going to have more programs like this online. Do go on to our Facebook page, like our Facebook page, and also go on to our website, bipuk.org, where you'll be able to find more information about the work that we are doing, not just in the UK, but around the world, in helping to tackle far-right extremism. For myself, Adnan Sohail, and our guest, JORAM VAN KLAVERN, take care, have a good evening.